Today we will talk about managing your team. And this is the first lecture of three lectures that talks about maintenance activities of a typical consultant. When we say maintenance activities, this doesn't really mean not doing anything or something that seem to be of minor importance to the main work of a consultant, which is really to propose solutions to whatever problems that your client would have. Now, managing your team is a vital activity in the consulting profession. Okay? And while some of us would probably not have the immediate opportunity to manage a team, it might be good also to understand how a team leader or a manager of consultants would address some team issues in relation to consultants. I mean, it's not going to be a complicated process. I do hope that what I will share in this commentary and this lecture would give you some initial ideas on how to actually manage your own team if you find yourselves having to do this. Now, teams have become an extremely common thing in organizations these days. The idea of teams probably would have emerged as a field of study in management sciences, perhaps in the middle of the 20th century. If you try to recall, um, perhaps earlier than that, maybe the 19th or 18th century, the idea of teams is not really a fashionable concept. Okay, but nevertheless, as management science grew, concepts around teams actually grew as well. And now, when you're dealing with consultants, a team of consultants rather, they actually make use of concepts in management science as regards teams in general. Okay, and for this particular talk or for this particular lecture, we will examine four major elements of team management. Okay, team selection or selecting your members of your team, internal communication, how communication happens within a team, okay, bonding activities or team dynamics. You actually take a look at how you help your team grow and thrive as the days go by, okay, as the team continues to exist over time. Okay, and lastly, we'll talk about individual development in relation to the entire team. So definitely, as a team, you are interested your team to grow, but you are also interested that the members of your team actually grow as well. So we'll take a look at these four things in a bit. Now, team selection. Uh, when we try to recruit people for a team, okay, or to be part of a team, typically there are two things that I'd like to share. Okay, in this regard, although recruitment on its own is a very deep topic, this lecture won't really go into those details. But for our purposes, especially for those who might be faced with having to come up with their own teams, okay, having full control over the composition of the team, these two things would be very important. Well, first is getting the mix right, the composition of your team. Okay, would you want your teams to be homogeneous in terms of membership, or would you want them to be diverse? Okay, and second idea here is the idea of deliberate recruiting. Okay, you always keep in mind of the team whenever you're getting people for the team. Okay, it sounds a little bit funny in the sense that that's the reason why you'd want to get people on your team. You really want to make sure also that the people you get for the team is going to be a good fit for the team. Okay, but more often than not, as practice has shown, people in a position to actually select members of the team, they don't actually keep the mix in mind or the composition in mind when they do the recruitment process. So we'll talk more about deliberate recruiting in a while. Okay. Now, when we talk about getting the mix right. Okay, we make project assignment decisions based on the specific needs of the engagement. It sort of makes sense. I mean, you always take a look at what the team is about, and then you select members who would be able to accomplish the objectives of that team. Okay, and just like any other team selection, you carefully weigh raw talent, experience, interpersonal skills, among other things. Okay, and the relative importance of these factors can vary from project to project. Okay, certain or team to team. Definitely, the principle here is that you want to select members who can actually help achieve the objectives of your team as quickly, as efficiently, as ethically as possible. And once you've come up with your draft, okay, the list of members for your team, well, you meet them, meet potential new members in person before you make the decision. In some cases, you undergo an interview or a series of interviews, okay, before you settle down on a decision to actually recruit this particular member for your team. And with that also, while you are interviewing each member individually, you also try to gain a sense of chemistry among your team members. I mean, you take a look at their behavior, you take a look at the mix of skills and knowledge that they have. Would it be redundant? Would they help one another? Are they complementary? So these are some of the questions you may have to answer when you're deciding on the composition of your team. And don't blindly accept others' word. Okay? I mean, of course, it's important that you get good references from the other people. More often than not, they still remain as the best source of talent when you're recruiting for teams. But nevertheless, don't just take their word for it. I mean, go through the process objectively, screen the candidates very well. Okay. And when it comes to recruitment activities, these are one of the few things that you cannot delegate to any other person. As the leader of the team, you are responsible for your team, and therefore it makes more sense that you actually are the one who takes care of meeting the candidates before you decide on selecting them for your team. Now, the second idea behind team selection is deliberate recruiting. Okay, the recruitment process involves numerous intensive situational or case study interviews. But it can vary. I mean, your techniques of interviewing can vary. It really depends on what you're comfortable with in terms of identifying whether a certain member is a fit for your team or not. Okay. Now, the goal here is to take a deep look into each candidate's mind to assess his analytical and interpersonal abilities and decide whether the candidate would be a good fit. Now, this is the traditional way of doing recruitment. You are always going to look for candidates who would present the best fit for your team. Okay? If you think about it, if you consider a company as one big team, okay, whenever you look for jobs, it's really falls into this same idea. Okay, it really is something like this. Okay, wherein every time you go to an interview, okay, the assessment to be done is actually whether you will fit within this large team known as the company or not. So that's the whole idea. You're always recruiting for fit, and that's the traditional way of doing it. Of course, there are some modern ways of understanding recruitment. Sometimes they say that hiring for fit is an overrated objective. In some cases, that might be true. But nevertheless, I mean, in a normal, regular situation, you normally try to get people who would be a good fit for your team. Now, how do you go about with team selection? Well, there are three tips that we can pick up from this. Well, now one is consider not just demonstrated ability, but even potential ability. Okay. Second, appreciate the value of diversity. This is in relation to the composition. Okay. And lastly, apply structure in recruiting efforts, as opposed to being spontaneous or being ad hoc in your approach. Now, for the first tip, Definitely, it is important that you look at the demonstrated ability of the candidate. Naturally, if the candidate hasn't been able to demonstrate anything in terms of accomplishment, in terms of the ability that he or she is purported to have, then it doesn't make sense for you to get this person for your team, right? However, more than the demonstrated ability, this is table stakes. This is like base minimum expectation. You also need to take a look at the potential ability of the candidate. Okay? And generally, when we look at potential, the idea behind here is that you want to be able to develop them further with the hopes that by developing them further, you can keep them longer in your teams, in your organizations, and then you prepare them for bigger, larger responsibilities, normally roles of leadership. Uh, Studies have shown that the best leaders or the best successors of outgoing leaders would be insiders, those who are already in the organization, rather than hiring somebody from outside to succeed an outgoing leader. Okay, so that's one example why it's very good that we look at potential ability because we help in the longevity of the organization as a whole. Okay. Definitely, the reason why we want to take a look at demonstrated ability is because we want this candidate to be able to do the things that's expected at the get-go, right? Although that's not usually the case. For example, for very junior roles, typically a fresh graduate would not have had a lot of demonstrated ability except of what has happened in school. Okay, not to worry because in that respect, the role is more potential ability rather than demonstrated ability. But I'm probably digressing. Nevertheless, in typical cases, when you are looking for opportunities to build a team, you definitely would want to get people with demonstrated ability first, and then see if that candidate, if he or she has potential ability on top of that demonstrated ability. Okay, so always looking for the best. Okay, definitely an individual's experience would be a heavy factor. Okay, and the idea here as well is when you're looking for potential ability, you would probably have to get candidates that are not from your usual sources. Okay, you'll probably have to spread your net more widely. Okay, in order for you to find people who can stay long in your organization. And this is true in every company, in every organization. If they did not cast their nets more widely than they would, then they probably would not have been able to get the stars that are occupying maybe 20, 30 years later down the line. Now, it's good to appreciate the value of diversity. By diversity, we mean people who, okay, your team, the composition of your team, in terms of the commonality isn't that high. So it's nice to talk about diversity. And typically, we look at diversity in terms of race, gender, age, okay? But we also talk about diversity of experience, okay? We get people who are experienced in one sector, and we get another person who might be experienced in another sector, and then still in a different sector for that third person. So we also look at diversity of experience. Now, the real value of a team comes from diversity and the right balance of background, enthusiasm, and strong intellect. Okay. The danger with having a team that is so homogeneous, okay, one of the fallouts, if you may, from a very homogeneous team is that team's opportunity or team's ability to be creative, to be innovative is actually low because you're not able to engage in certain activities like lateral thinking or thinking out of the box, okay, which is pretty much what you'd expect in every creative or innovative activity. Now, especially in the field of information technology, wherein the industry moves very fast, uh, evolutions happen very quickly, you definitely would want to keep on having that innovative engine running in every team that you find yourselves in, okay? So that goes to show that you also need to have a diverse team. Okay. Now diversity also brings fresh perspective to a typical problem. Okay, sometimes you're able to challenge entrenched assumptions about it. Okay, and yeah, it can make the whole problem solving experience more interesting for the team. Now, true diversity can strengthen the problem solving process and enhance the development of individual team members. Now, the last tip when it comes to recruitment of team members is applying structure to recruiting efforts. Okay. Uh, in a nutshell, what's important to note here is that this is part of deliberate thinking. When we say deliberate, it's not being spontaneous or ad hoc or off the cuff, as you say, but the importance of forethought and consistency. Okay, by putting structure in your recruiting efforts, that actually is a demonstration of deliberation. Okay, and that's what's important. Okay, um, again, your system can vary from one company to another. That's fine. There's no one solid perfect way of doing recruitment. Nevertheless, the whole idea here is that you have something structured, you have something orderly, and it makes things more efficient on your part when you're doing recruitment. Okay, so spend time developing a consistent recruiting process. Okay, I think that's if you have that opportunity to do so. Now, some guidance in thinking through your own organization. You must answer two key questions: whom should we hire? Okay, so and how should we hire them? Now, to answer the first question, you start with your business needs. Okay, so definitely this goes beyond the basic job description. And this is where we're able to tie that connection in terms of fit. Okay, how would you know that a person is fit for the company or for the organization? Well, you take a look at whether that person, okay, can actually support you with whatever your business might need now and in the future. Okay, so eventually, the question that you'll have to ask yourself is, what is the most important task that this person will be responsible for? It can be enshrined in the job description, that is fine, or it can be something else. Okay, it can be based on the mission or in the plans of the management team, for example. Although all positions involve numerous activities, assess the job using the elevator test. We talked about the 30-second pitch, right? And try to see very quickly, will this person be a good fit? Or can you actually defend the proposition of hiring this person in a short period of time? Okay. Also, you may want to devise a list of key attributes that relate to the successful completion of the key tasks. So, aside from coming up with a job description, you probably would want to come up with a grocery list of key traits and attributes that would ensure that a candidate can be successful in that job. Okay. Now, once you try to understand what the businesses are, then how do you find the right person? So, sourcing. So, in recruitment parlance, this is what we call sourcing. Okay, so how do we source our talent? How do we source our candidates? Well, you need a plan that identifies potential sources and details the tasks and resources required. So, if you really want to be deliberate in your recruitment, even your sourcing has to be deliberate as well. Okay, it's not just like, okay, I have a job vacancy, I just spread it around, and hopefully somebody picks it up. No, I mean, you have to be very deliberate with your sources. Of course, you can take a look at the usual platforms for sourcing. You can take a look at job search websites. Okay, that's possible. Okay, things like LinkedIn would be a good source for recruiters, but you can also take a look at your own teams. I mean, do they know of somebody from a different organization who might be interested to move into your team? Okay, so that's what you call a referral technique or strategy. Now, the second element in team management is internal communication or team communication. Now, communication is one of the most important elements in effective team management. In fact, if your communication is not well oiled, I mean, you can expect the team to fail. Okay, teams cannot function without it, and yet its importance is often underestimated. People ignore the fact that you need to be very deliberate in good communication. Also, there is no one best communication style. I mean, it really depends on the person, really depends on the composition of the team. It will fluctuate. Okay, it will fluctuate. It's not supposed to be something static. Okay, it's not like a cookbook recipe wherein things are a little bit fixed. No, there will be some variations. But again, the whole point of communication is you also want to know what it is that you want the other person to do for you as well. I mean, that's at the heart of communication. So things like convincing or persuasion, these are some of the motives as to why you want to embark on communication, right? You want people to actually appreciate uh, the work that they're doing. At the same time, you keep them motivated to actually continue that on. I mean, that's more or less the reasons why you want to do communication. But you know, I'm probably digressing. But let's take a look at team communication. So how do we go about with being effective in team communications? Well, these three things are important to remind ourselves that it's not really that of a rocket science. Well, first is remember that you have two ears and only one mouth. Listening. Okay, communication is about listening. Okay, number two, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. It's not just about the content. Okay, it's how you say it as well that is equally important. Okay, naturally, you need to say the truth, but how you say it, if you say it rudely, or if you say it in a incomplete or or not so confident manner, then okay, you lose the objective of actually communicating well. And lastly, and this is something that might seem a little bit awkward for most of us if we're not used to it, over communication is actually better than under communication. It's better to be in Tagalog, makulit, as opposed to just being quiet or silent about it. Let's go with the first idea. Okay, you have only two ears and one mouth. Listening. I'm sure if you read books, articles, listen to presentations about effective communication, more often than not, you will hear things like listening or active listening. Okay, I wouldn't want to add anything to that literature except to repeat that idea. Okay, listen. Rather than being aggressive in saying your piece, okay, sometimes there's this temptation to, wanting to say something because it feels good. It gives you that sense of pride, or maybe, I mean, whatever it is that you say is actually useful. Okay, it gives you that sense of fulfillment and contribution. But if you really want your teams to be working effectively, there has to be that balance. And sometimes you have to favor listening more than speaking. Okay. So, and we know this. If we have the tendency to keep on speaking, we miss out opportunities of getting a lot of facts, a lot of data from other people that would be useful in our decision making process. Okay. Uh, and the thing there is that listening on its own can be a boring exercise. Yeah, sometimes we don't want to go into listening because it's boring. It's probably not gonna give us anything. So the caveat when it comes to listening is that we do active listening. We try to engage ourselves in the present moment. Okay, and while we're listening, we're also thinking at the same time. And that's the idea of communication. It's supposed to be a dialogue. Okay, listening doesn't mean that you will not talk. Okay, you will need to talk. I mean, it doesn't say two ears and zero mouths, right? You still have one mouth. You still need to speak up. Okay, and if you're gonna do the math, probably you need to only spend 33% of your time talking and 66% or 67% of the time listening. Okay, that seems to be a good ratio, but you still need to speak. So in other words, when you're doing active listening, you're trying to understand what the other person is saying. Get involved in clarifications, you get involved in paraphrasing in order for you to really see whether you actually have understood the other person or not. Okay. Now, second idea, the second tip in communication, it's not just what you say. Okay, it's not about the content, it's how you say it. And misunderstandings are a plague in today's workplace. Okay, so the art of communication is all about inferences, innuendos, nuances, reading between the lines, that make it difficult to convey our messages as we would intend. Okay, sometimes even if we really wanted to say things as they are, like saying things as they are, very straightforward, and yet other people still misinterpret it, even if you've already said it as it is, right? It's like you're saying 1 plus 1 equals 2. That's the only thing you said. And other people would be accusing you, yeah, you're patronizing us, or no, you're actually baiting us to say that 1 plus 1 equals 3, and then you'll blame us for that. I mean, something to that effect, right? So even if you're just going to be just straightforward with what it is that you want to say, it can be subject to misinterpretation. And there are a lot of reasons for this. I mean, people are unique. Okay, we're brought up differently as well. Okay, and this contributes to how we actually learn to communicate. So the important thing here is that we should be conscious of how we try to communicate, and how we communicate can actually can vary from one person to another. So this is in relation also to listening. The idea with listening is that you're always putting focus on the other person. So in that same way, okay, not just listening but communicating the same message to different people requires you to understand different people, and then maybe tailoring how you actually communicate that to the other person. Okay? So by becoming more familiar with our own communication style and understanding that other people have their own different styles, we can begin to see beyond the way people are saying things to listen to what they're actually saying. Okay? So that's part of it. I mean, it's not enough that we just listen. We also have to tailor our way of speaking to the other person. Some people would like it very upfront, very confrontational. That's fine. They can live with that. Others like a little bit of a dance. You try to do a little bit of a build up first, and then you go with the main message. There are people like that. Others are very data oriented, so they'd like to see more numbers, more figures. Others like more of the artistic story type. Okay. The important thing here is that you have to understand what the other person is acclimatized to actually do. Okay. Now the last tip in communication is over communication is better than under communication. You see, the risk of under communication is that you probably will not have been able to communicate what you should have communicated, so you miss out information, right? Under communication leads to lack of information. That's sure. Okay, because you don't have information, you will make mistakes, you will make erroneous decisions, okay, which will hurt everyone, which will affect the entire team, which will actually make you do more work in the process later on. Over communication, okay, over communication doesn't exactly mean that it's most optimal in terms of effort. The fact that you're over communicating means that you may have been redundant at some point in time. But if you think about it, the benefit of over communicating is that you're ensuring that what it is that needs to be communicated is actually communicated. You increase the chances that the other person would get to listen to what it is that you're saying. Okay, but of course, I mean, in tandem with the other tips, you don't try to do it in a very antagonistic or very forceful manner, right? I mean, you're not being redundant for the sake of being redundant, right? You want to be redundant because you want to make sure that everybody has captured the communication properly. Okay, so the additional communication cost that you incur because of over communication is actually like investment cost. It's like insurance. You pay something for insurance, right? You don't get it immediately. It's possible that you won't be able to encash your insurance, but when that time comes that you need to cash in on your insurance, you can. And that's probably one way for us to look at over communication costs. Okay. Now, so some guidance. Okay. So, well, first tip. Okay. If you find yourselves having to be in charge of ensuring the communication within the team, well, formalize listening training. Some of us aren't really wired to learn how to listen. And second, you may want to do some sort of a profiling of personalities of people in the team, because they might have styles, especially communication styles, that may come into conflict with one another if we don't know, or if we're not careful in how we express those communication styles. Okay. Now the third topic, for the third element in team management, we go to bonding, to team dynamics. Okay, so how the team works together. Okay, I think that's important. It's often underrated. I mean, people ignore it, people overlook it, people think that it's okay, you just let them do their thing. right? I mean, you let them do their thing, and hope that everything will turn out to be okay. And sometimes they turn out well. But it's good also to be deliberate in how we do team bonding. Okay. Why? Perhaps it is the nature of business to drive forward with a relentless focus on results. You know that team dynamics will always have an impact to the bottom line, to what the organization really needs. And we often find ourselves in tough team situations because uh, we overvalued the end product and undervalued the process of getting it done. This means we overvalue the idea of forming a team versus the process of really actually making sure that the team runs well, right? So some ideas here, some good practices regarding team bonding or team dynamics. Well, it's good that you take your team's temperature to maintain morale. Every so often, you take a pulse how the team is doing, and a little team bonding goes a long way. Team bonding, well, things like other non-work activities, maybe dinner, maybe a little bit of sports, bowling, or some excursion. Okay, so these are examples of team bonding activities that can be useful. Okay. Now, taking your team's temperature to maintain morale. So nobody likes to walk in a freezing cold or boiling hot room, right? So you want to make sure how's the team as a whole? Are they really working well? Are they sort of feeling a little bit awkward with one another? Okay, I mean, and it happens. Sometimes the team one day is very, very good. They really click, as they say. Or other times, maybe the next week, you'd see them very cold. Okay, they're not talking to one another. It's your job when you're managing teams to take a look at your team's temperature every so often. Okay. And the team's temperature is actually a function of many other factors like motivation, okay, how they work well with one another, the rapport, the existing rapport between members, okay. And the if I were to summarize team bonding or team dynamics into one word, it's that idea of empathy. We really want to make sure that we feel the other person, right? We know how they're doing genuinely and not for the sake of, doing these things for team management, right? That we're genuinely concerned for the others. I think that's the whole underlying principle for team bonding, for team dynamics that are good. You need to be empathetic. Okay? And as a leader, you have to make sure that everybody is also empathetic with one another. Now, a little team bonding goes a long way. I mean, if you intend to work together for a long period of time, then there should be also moments, there should be times that you need to get out once in a while. Have fun, have a little bit of levity in terms of your activities. Okay, some of that is okay, okay, but balance is also important. Okay, so everything in moderation. The bonding can also take place at work. It did not be outside of the office. Okay, but what's important is you have that change of pace so that you get people to be a little bit more relaxed. You try to find out how they are in a different environment as well. You're always not looking at them from a perspective of work. Um, and but that said, I mean, when you do or plan bonding events, you have to be strategic. Okay, focus on something that everyone will enjoy, and include significant others when possible. So you want to involve family or relatives as well whenever you can, or if you can afford to do so. Okay. So how do we go about with this? How do we execute effective team bonding or team dynamics? Well, spend time together, but not too much. Okay, there's that balance, and reward well. So. Rewards and recognition would always be important when it comes to ensuring the motivation of a particular team. Okay, first idea, spending time together, is actually very critical. It seems very commonsensical, like it's like saying that you don't have to tell us that we have to spend time together. Well, sometimes we fail to appreciate that we don't spend time together a lot. Okay, so bonding doesn't have to be around a fun theme. It's just making sure that we get quality time with one another. Sometimes working in another side project that actually helps in bonding. Okay, that's work related, but it also improves that rapport among those team members in that side project. Plan for few events, but plan them strategically. It's not about having many events. People will experience burnout. That's also the flip side there. But plan a few ones. but make sure that you plan something, right? You can't really ignore the fact that you have to spend time with one another and focus on the timing, the type of activity. I mean, you have to know what really clicks with each one, right? And you also take a look at what is most effective with the least amount of spending that would happen. And reward well. Okay, different types of reward will work in different companies. You can provide cash money, that's usually possible, but sometimes it can be in kind, maybe some gift certificate or like some tokens like t-shirts, okay, bags or anything of that sort. They need not be financial, that's for sure. And often simple but widespread recognition programs, more than the reward, it's the act that you are recognizing people or even the whole team, okay, really helps elevate the bonding, the dynamics very well, okay. And they tend to be more effective than financial incentives. So some guidance when designing a program of bonding activities for your organization: keep in mind resources and culture, okay, these two things, okay, culture and resources. The context of the culture of your organization will play a major role in how best to promote bonding. Okay? Some people would like certain things, others will prefer another thing. Okay. And there are so many variations in norms and acceptable behavior. Okay, that's fine. The idea here is not to have what is known as a cookie cutter solution to bonding activities. That can change. You have to learn how to be flexible. And that is also a function of the composition of your team. This time around, your team might like to go bowling. But the next time around, if you have a different set of team members, you'd probably want something else. You probably want to go fishing, I don't know. Or you want to go mountain hiking, okay? Or you want to do outreach activities with social relevance. That can happen, okay? But you also have to know that as we do this, as we try to understand the culture of the organization, well, we need to spend also. We need to put in the resources in order to support these bonding activities. Okay. So if your organization doesn't devote many resources to bonding, then you will probably have to make a case for the benefits of bonding that will convince whoever controls your organization's finances. So how do you go about this? Well, there are many ways on trying to convince people in terms of, I mean, proposing that you put in money to actually spend for bonding activities. Okay, so there are many techniques for persuasion, for convincing people. I mean, if your decision makers are the numbers type, then you put in quantitative arguments. If they're the types who like to see things from a 10,000-foot view, very abstract, then you probably would want to have something more intuitive, more qualitative. Okay. If you can also find a good reference in other organizations and other teams, sort of a best practice, then you can use that as a case, as an argument for yourself. So you can say that this team is doing it in this way. This team is not different from us. Maybe we can do it ourselves as well. Okay. And sometimes you don't try to propose something that's like big off the bat. Right? You try to do it slowly, okay, one bit at a time. And this is what we call doing a pilot or a proof of concept first. Okay. So you don't just go right away and propose, we go out of town. No, I mean, maybe you just propose like having lunch somewhere in a mall. I mean, that's like a pilot. Okay, you try to test it out, try to feel how they're doing, and then you go with it. Okay. Okay, and then as you plan your activities, remember to keep things in moderation. Also involve many people in the planning process as much as possible. Okay, eventually they'll be able to lead the activities themselves. Okay, and after every event, you should also take a pulse. Did they like the event? Okay, do an evaluation. Okay, of the event. Okay. And lastly, also have fun. Enjoy the activities as much as possible. Don't try to be, as they say, the party pooper. Try to dampen everyone's spirit. There are people like that. They tend to be very critical. Oh, you should have done this. Oh, you forgot to do that. Okay, then I mean, everybody put in the effort. Everybody's also putting in the time. So maybe it might make more sense that you support and cooperate as the best as you can. Okay. If you feel that the organizers could have done it a bit better, then you can give that feedback towards the end. And I'm sure and I'm hopeful that the organizers would take that in mind, and maybe the future events would be much better. Now, the last or the fourth element in team management is actually individual development, how you're able to develop each one in your team. Now, the job itself is actually a source of development. Okay, in fact, when it comes to developing adults or much older people, there's a bias to making sure that the person is actually doing something on the job rather than what we call formal education, wherein they sit in the classroom and they absorb lectures passively. Now that's the classroom setup is perhaps okay for younger people, but as you grow older, the tendency, okay, shifts from a lecture type arrangement to something that's more active, that's more applied. Okay, and being in a team doing work, consulting work, is actually an opportunity for individual development. So you also take a look at how you can develop your people in your team. Okay. So there are many ways for that. There are many tools. Okay, you have performance assessments. Okay, a process of understanding their training needs, the feedback mechanism. All of these things actually help develop the individual within that team. So when it comes to individual development, well, two things. Well, make sure you set high expectations. Don't settle for something that's mediocre or middling, and evaluate regularly and make it balanced. So that sense of consistency and really determining whether the person is actually growing on the job. Okay, it's one thing that a person does the job. That's great. But at the same time, you also want to have that person doing that job also growing from that job. Because if that person is no longer growing, it becomes a chore, it becomes a burden to to that employee, to that team member, to the point that at some point in time, you may never know it, that team member would be so demotivated that he or she will probably not do the job anymore. And it can happen. Okay, so make sure that you are able to evaluate regularly. Of course, setting high expectations helps ensure that the person doesn't plateau right away. So you see that there's still this runway for the employee to grow, and that's what's important as well. Okay, so when we say set high expectations, well, we expect that they will actually come up with high results. Okay, low expectations yield low results. I mean, okay, and then that's typical. Now, when you set high goals, managers actually help overcome the inertia that results from the fear of change. I mean, when people know that there's a lofty goal to go. Okay, I mean, it's a little bit double edged. Okay, because if you set too high of a goal, then it becomes an automatic demotivator. People won't push forward. But if it's high enough to the point that you get them interested, you get to tickle their minds a bit, that would lead them to do something. Okay, that's a good start. Okay, and you just have to keep on pushing them. You just have to keep on monitoring them. Okay, giving them the support that they need in order for them to eventually reach those goals. So the goals have to be high, but they have to be reasonable. They have to be achievable, nevertheless. Okay. And this is the idea of stretch targets or stretch goals. You really want to make sure that by putting a very high of a goal, you're actually stretching the person, but not to the point of snapping that person, right? You stretch that person because once you stretch that person, once you release the person from that stretch, it will no longer go back to how it was. And that figure of speech, in a way, that imagery, is what you see when a person is growing. You stretch that person a bit, as you release it, it stays in that form, then that person is actually growing. And that's good. That's good. That's good input for everyone. Okay. Now, and the other tip is evaluating regularly, making it balanced. Okay, so giving good feedback. Okay, well, feedback is a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, we have a strong interest in finding out what people think of us. Okay, on the other hand, feedback can makes us feel uncomfortable. Okay, when it forces us to confront our weaknesses. You know, that's the interesting thing about feedback. You know, if you try to recall in your lives, right? What was that one feedback that you've learned from someone, from parents, from relatives, from friends, that you've grown the most? Okay. When you take a look at that feedback, I'm sure that feedback was very uncomfortable for you when you first heard of it. It may have been painful, it may have been embarrassing, mortifying. but that was the feedback that made you grow the most. So you see the irony there, right? We would love feedback because we know that we can grow from feedback, but our instincts shy away from it because they hurt us. They make us feel vulnerable, right? So as managers, as you lead teams, eventually when you have to give feedback to people, you know that people would really need feedback, but you have to be able to deliver it in such a way that they won't see the negative side effects of feedback more. They need to see feedback for what it is, an opportunity for growth. And handled properly, feedback is one of the most important development tools around. Okay? And in fact, mentoring is one form of a feedback mechanism. Formal evaluation tools, okay, the 360-degree feedback is also another tool that you can use for evaluation purposes. And remember, when it comes to feedback, make sure that it's balanced. When it comes to comments, there are two considerations: the quantity of the comments and the type. Is it positive or negative? Okay. Now the quantity issue comes down to how many comments are enough. Okay. If you give too few comments, maybe the feedback is not going to be that clear. So the person who will receive the feedback won't really understand what is being asked of him to improve on. Okay. Too many comments can have a negative effect of motivation. We said that a while ago. It can be a demotivator. Okay, the employee might feel too much pressure, okay, and become so consumed with the evaluation that other job responsibilities become secondary. Okay, that's also possible. The priorities change. Now, that person, because he or she has experienced too many feedback, would think that this is a very important thing, that I'll probably do this feedback, then do something that's really important for me in terms of work, like doing my actual job, right? So there are employees like that. So some guidance when we think about individual development. Well, first, identify your organizational objectives. Okay. Again, when we look at teams, team management, it is never divorced from the objective of the big organization, from the company. Okay. So same thing with individual development. You want to make sure that you develop people in line with what the company is looking for in the future, right? Next, you consider how to communicate these expectations to the employees in the organization. Okay. Another guidance here is that when we do performance assessment, it should meet three criteria. It should be objective, it should be based on expectations that were set in advance, okay, and it should account only for events that were within the control of the person. So sometimes we tend to criticize the person for not being able to accomplish the outcomes, but if you think about it, there's nothing that the person could have done either way, right? So it's like you're blaming the person for the typhoon or the earthquake, right? Because that's not within the control of the person. And finally, think about the frequency and the type of feedback in your organization. Okay. So yeah, just to wrap everything up, okay, the study of leadership and team management has received significant attention in academic and practitioner study over the past 50 years. Okay? This is pretty much a 20th century phenomenon. Okay? Take a look at literature. You probably have not seen the concept of teams in the 19th or the 18th century, even earlier. Okay? You have structures, hierarchies, yes, but working together as a team or really studying it for the dynamics, okay, for recruitment. I mean, that's something that you haven't really thought of. When we think of collectives in the past, the only time that you actually get part or be part of that collective is that you were born in it, right? So, but in this case, in the 20th century, the concept of teams, of organizations, of companies is a new invention at that time. Okay. Team management is often more of an art than a science. While we've talked about practices, okay, techniques, a little bit of structure here and there, but it's more of an art. I mean, sometimes you might find yourselves with two situations with the same parameters, but you can't really put the same effort, or you can't use the same technique or the same lever all the time. Okay, you have to learn how to balance it. It's like a dance, as I would say it. Okay, so you have to learn, okay, to give a little, to take a little, push, pull a little bit. Okay. And the specific recommendations may not apply in all situations. So this is not a cookie cutter situation, right? It's not like you have a cookie cutter, okay? as long as I have this cookie cutter, it will work in any circumstance. No, it's not like that. Even so, the general themes of careful selection, recruitment, constant communication, selective bonding, and purposeful development should serve us all well. And with that, I end my lecture on managing your teams. As usual, if you have any questions about this particular topic, feel free to email me or send me a message in the usual channels. With that, thank you for listening, and okay, see you around. Okay, bye bye.